Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the rules of the desktop world have quietly changed overnight. Not with a flashy announcement, not with a dramatic keynote, but with a slow, undeniable shift that suddenly feels irreversible. For decades, Windows has been the default assumption. It was the baseline, the thing hardware was built for, software was designed around, and workplaces standardized on without much thought. Linux, meanwhile, lived in the background, powering servers, running the internet, hiding inside routers, supercomputers, and phones, respected but rarely invited to the desktop table. But now something has happened. Linux has crossed a line, and it's a line Windows simply cannot follow without breaking its own identity. This is not about market share numbers or fanboy arguments. This is about philosophy, control, adaptability, and a future Microsoft cannot fully own or stop. The first thing to understand is that Linux didn't suddenly become good. It's been good for a long time. What changed is the environment around it. The modern desktop is no longer just a local machine running local programs. It's a portal into cloud services, developer ecosystems, containerized workflows, and AI-driven tools. Ironically, this new world aligns almost perfectly with how Linux has always worked. Linux was built around modularity, scripting, automation, and transparency. Windows was built around abstraction, user-friendly defaults, and centralized control. For years, abstraction won. But now, transparency is winning, and that's where the line was crossed. Look at the direction Microsoft has taken with Windows over the last decade. Each version has become more cloud-dependent, more account-centric, more locked into Microsoft's ecosystem. You sign in with a Microsoft account. Your settings sync through Microsoft servers. Your files are nudged toward OneDrive. Your operating system is increasingly treated as a service rather than a product you own. For many users, especially power users, developers, and privacy-conscious people, this feels less like progress and more like a loss of agency. Windows is no longer just a tool. It's a platform Microsoft actively steers, monetizes, and shapes according to its business goals. Linux, on the other hand, has gone in the opposite direction while still embracing modern needs. It integrates with cloud services when you want it to. It supports containers, virtualization, and remote workflows natively. But crucially, it does not demand your identity, your data, or your obedience. You choose your distribution. You choose your desktop environment. You choose how updates work, when they install, and what they include. That freedom used to come at the cost of convenience. Today, that cost has largely disappeared. This is where Linux crossed the line. It stopped being good enough for enthusiasts and became genuinely better for a growing number of real-world users. Not hypothetically better, not philosophically better, but practically better. Developers were the first to notice. They always are. Modern development workflows revolve around containers, package managers, scripting languages, and command line tooling. On Linux, these things are native citizens. On Windows, they often feel bolted on, even with impressive efforts like WSL. And WSL itself is the biggest admission of all. Microsoft had to embed Linux inside Windows to keep developers happy. That alone tells you which direction the gravity is pulling. But the shift didn't stop with developers. Creative professionals are now part of the story too. For a long time, Linux lacked the big-name creative tools. That gap is shrinking fast. Blender is industry standard. DaVinci Resolve runs natively on Linux. Krita, Inkscape, and Darktable are powerful and mature. Even when proprietary software isn't available, compatibility layers like Proton and Wine have reached a level that would have seemed impossible 10 years ago. Gaming, once Linux's weakest point, is now one of its strongest surprise victories. Valve's investment in Proton didn't just make Linux gaming viable, it normalized it. Suddenly, millions of users are running Linux without even realizing it through devices like the Steam Deck, and that's another line Windows can't follow. Linux can disappear into products without forcing its brand, its account system, or its monetization model. Windows cannot. Microsoft cannot ship Windows in a device and then step back. Windows always comes with strings attached. Linux can be invisible infrastructure or a polished consumer desktop, depending on the need. That flexibility is unmatched. There's also a deeper, more uncomfortable truth for Microsoft. Linux is not a single company's product. It cannot be bought, shut down, or redirected by a boardroom decision. Microsoft can change Windows overnight. Linux changes through consensus, forks, competition, and community pressure. That makes it chaotic at times, but it also makes it resilient. When users don't like a direction, they leave. When developers disagree, they fork. When a company tries to dominate, the ecosystem pushes back. Windows users don't have that option. If Microsoft decides a feature is mandatory, it's mandatory. If telemetry increases, you accept it or you leave the platform entirely. And people are leaving. Quietly, steadily, and often without drama. Not everyone is switching their main machine to Linux tomorrow. But more people are dual booting. More people are installing Linux on older hardware instead of upgrading to Windows 11. More schools, governments, and businesses are reconsidering long-term dependence on a single vendor. Each of these decisions on its own seems small. Together, they form a trend Microsoft cannot reverse with marketing. Windows 11 exposed this more clearly than anything before it. Hardware requirements that cut off perfectly usable machines, UI changes that prioritize aesthetics over efficiency, increased integration with online services. For the first time, large numbers of users felt actively pushed away rather than pulled forward. Linux stepped into that gap effortlessly. Install Linux on hardware Windows abandoned, and it runs fast, modern, and secure. That alone is a powerful statement. Linux didn't just catch up, it rescued users' Windows left behind. Security is another line that's been crossed. Windows security has improved massively, but it relies heavily on centralized updates, proprietary components, and opaque systems. Linux security, while not perfect, is built around openness. Vulnerabilities are discussed publicly, fixes are reviewed openly. The model assumes breaches will happen and focuses on containment and transparency. In a world increasingly concerned about trust, this matters. Governments and institutions are paying attention. So are individuals. Then there's AI, the next battleground. Microsoft wants Windows to be the AI desktop, tightly integrated with cloud-based copilots and services. Linux approaches AI differently. It becomes the platform you run AI on, not the product that sells it to you. Local models, open-source frameworks, custom pipelines, and hardware-level control all thrive on Linux. Researchers, hobbyists, and startups are building the future of AI on Linux systems because they can see, modify, and optimize every layer. Windows can offer AI features. Linux offers AI freedom. What makes this shift unstoppable is that Linux doesn't need to win the desktop war in the traditional sense. It doesn't need 90% market share. It just needs to be the best option for enough influential users. Developers influence tools, tools influence platforms, platforms influence everyone else. This is exactly how Linux took over servers, then cloud infrastructure, then mobile devices through Android. The desktop is simply the next frontier, and this time, the conditions are right. Microsoft knows this. That's why it contributes heavily to the Linux kernel. That's why it embraces open source in some areas while locking down others. That's why Azure runs on Linux at massive scale. But there's a contradiction at the heart of Microsoft's strategy. It wants the benefits of Linux without giving up control. It wants openness without unpredictability. It wants developers to feel free while users remain locked into its ecosystem. That balance is becoming harder to maintain. Linux crossed the line when it proved it could offer polish without surrendering freedom. Modern Linux desktops are not rough experiments anymore. They are refined, fast, and customizable in ways Windows simply isn't. You can make Linux look and behave like almost anything, or you can leave it minimal and efficient. Windows gives you one vision, one path, and increasingly, one acceptable way to use it. For the Linux Chronicle audience, this moment matters. We are not watching a sudden revolution. We are watching a slow tectonic shift. The ground under Windows is moving, not because Windows is bad, but because the world no longer matches the assumptions Windows was built on. Linux fits the modern world too well to ignore. It fits distributed work, remote servers, cross-platform development, privacy concerns, and hardware diversity naturally. And here's the final, most important part. This shift doesn't require everyone to love Linux. It doesn't require perfect apps or universal support. It only requires Windows to keep moving in a direction that serves Microsoft first and users second. As long as that continues, Linux will keep gaining ground by simply being what it has always been, open. adaptable, and user-controlled. Linux has crossed a line. Windows can't follow, because Windows cannot become something it isn't. It cannot give up control without undermining its business model. Linux doesn't have that problem. It never did. And that's why this shift isn't loud, flashy, or dramatic. It's quiet, steady, and unstoppable. The future desktop isn't owned by one company anymore, and that may be the most important change of all.